Bishop Paul Morton has finally spoken up at the age of 74, and the entire gospel community is in disbelief over what he recently disclosed about his wife. For many years, there were whispers, rumors, and unconfirmed stories that kept coming up. For Bishop Morton did something unexpected today. He confronted every rumor head-on, and his admission astonished both detractors and fans. And you'll see why everything has altered after hearing what he acknowledged. One of the most well-known and respected voices in the gospel community for many years has been Bishop Paul Morton. Millions of people respected the legacy he left behind through his leadership, music, and sermons. However, there were concerns hidden beneath the sermons, the public persona, and the polished reputation. Silent inquiries. From congregation to congregation, rumors circulated, stories that were never spoken aloud but were only whispered, and his marriage became the focal point of those rumors. People questioned how much of the rumors were true, how much was made up, and how much was exaggerated. However, none of it was ever specifically addressed by Bishop Morton, not openly, not explicitly, not to the degree of integrity that many had hoped for up until now, because he recently validated what many had thought for years in a moment that no one anticipated coming. Furthermore, no one anticipated the complexity, depth, and humanity of the truth he disclosed about his wife, their journey, and the struggles they waged behind closed doors. You won't believe where this story is going to go next, I promise. Take a moment to consider this before we go any farther. What happens if a public figure decides to tell the truth instead of defending their reputation? What occurs when the story that the world believed to be true is completely different from the truth? The revelations start at this point. However, everyone was taken aback by what Bishop Morton initially disclosed. One thing has followed Bishop Paul Morton as steadily as his ministry for as long as he has been in the public spotlight: whispers. These rumors weren't outrageous tabloid stories, rather, they were the kind that were discussed in church halls, online forums, and private discussions, and usually started with the same question: did you hear? They were more subdued and tenacious, the kind that proliferated gradually and almost organically, as though propelled by the gospel community's own atmosphere. And his marriage was at the heart of it all. Everything was questioned. Was his marriage as flawless as it seemed on stage? Was his wife enduring conflicts that the general public never witnessed? Was the man who advocated for openness concealing something he was reluctant to acknowledge? While some appreciated Bishop Morton and his wife's unity whenever they appeared together, others were constantly curious about what was left unsaid. It wasn't out of the ordinary for religious leaders to safeguard their personal affairs, but Morton's interest remained unabated. There was friction behind the scenes, according to some. Health issues were whispered by others. Some said there had been times when their marriage was under pressure that no outsider could truly comprehend, times when they had experienced emotional estrangement, and times when they had made choices that put their union to the test. Bishop Morton, however, said nothing at all. The rumors continued despite his silence. They became louder as a result, because silence tells its own story, particularly in the context of public ministry. People began to think they already knew the truth as the years went by. They used their own creativity, presumptions, and disjointed bits of knowledge to fill in the holes. His marriage's mystery became more significant than the actual facts. The fact that Bishop Morton had been carrying a tale for decades, however, remained unknown. He never thought the world was prepared to hear such a personal story. An account of his wife, his family, and the emotional burden he bore in silence during some of his most trying times. However, he didn't begin where most had anticipated when he eventually made the decision to talk. He didn't start with an explanation, an excuse, or a defense. He started with something far more vulnerable and revealing. Everyone anticipated Bishop Paul Morton to dismiss the accusations, label them falsehoods, and defend himself, as most prominent individuals do when their private lives become the subject of rumors. When he eventually spoke, however, he didn't. Rather, he inhaled deeply and revealed something that quickly caused the room to freeze. He claimed that the rumors weren't made up, they weren't arbitrary, they weren't fabricated. They originated from a reality he had been secretly harboring for many years. Speaking steadily, he disclosed that his marriage had gone through periods so difficult, perplexing, and spiritually taxing that even he doubted their continued existence. He talked of times when their relationship felt more like a battlefield than a partnership, nights of silent prayer and days of emotional detachment. He didn't bring up drama to amuse the audience. He was not overly dramatic, he was only being honest. And it started with his wife's difficulties. She had difficulties for years behind closed doors that the general public was unaware of. Not scandals or betrayals, but internal conflicts and emotional storms that molded her behavior, her love, and her ability to handle the demands of being married to a world's spiritual leader. He described how she had to deal with loneliness and strain that few could comprehend because the duties of ministry frequently caused him to be everywhere but at home. She occasionally felt ignored, unheard, and invisible behind his growing popularity, he admitted. Then came the moment that left everyone in a state of shock. Bishop Morton also acknowledged that their marriage did not begin in the best of circumstances. Before they ever exchanged vows, he disclosed that he battled intense self-doubt, not about her but about his own readiness, maturity, and spirituality to love her as she deserved. He claimed that the demands imposed on a young bishop, combined with the weight of ministry, caused fissures that gradually widened over time. Cracks that couldn't be filled by church applause or happy pictures. People felt cracks, even if they were unable to explain them. Then he whispered something that touched everyone's heart. I never talked about how I let her down, not in the scandalous sense, not in the human sense, not in communication, not in presence, and not in fully comprehending the emotional storms she went through in silence while he bore the burden of millions of people's expectations. Bishop Morton acknowledged for the first time that the rumors weren't biased. It wasn't just her who struggled. Both of them were managing a shaky, overburdened marriage that was continually put to the test by the attention of public ministry. Bishop Morton then revealed something even more startling just when the audience thought the confession was finished. He disclosed that one rumor came dangerously close to ruining his reputation. There was a persistent myth that dogged him for years, and he finally addressed it for the first time in his entire ministry. He then validated the notion that no one had ever anticipated him to discuss aloud, which completely altered the atmosphere of the room. Bishop Paul Morton's tone changed to one that was solid, steady, and plainly serious, and as he continued, the room fell silent, not because his words were sentimental. This was no longer a reflection of the individual. This was a leader getting ready to speak about something he had mostly shunned throughout his public career. He made it clear that he had been the target of more than one rumor. Every few years it reappeared, made the rounds in church circles, and was revived on social media. It caused doubts about his ethics, his leadership, and his marriage, and after years of silence, he finally confessed it. The rumor was this, that his relationship with his wife had serious internal issues early in their marriage, challenges so severe that they nearly parted before the public even knew. People conjectured for decades. Did a private marital crisis occur? Was their union ever unstable? Were they just putting on a show of togetherness for the ministry's benefit? At last, Bishop Morton responded. Yes, he explained, their marriage did reach a major breaking point many years ago. He acknowledged that they found themselves on opposing sides of an agonizing dilemma because of the demands of ministry, the emotional toll on his wife, and their personal distances from one another. He clarified that it wasn't a scandal, an affair, or a moral failing. It was the burden of emotional detachment, weariness, and the excessive demands made of them both. He claimed that because they were unprepared for the demands of his calling, their marriage was strained. He admitted that he was away from home far too frequently, traveling all the time, putting his ministry obligations first, and inadvertently leaving his wife to bear the load by herself. He acknowledged that she suffered from the psychological effects of playing a part she didn't want to play and being in the spotlight she didn't request. Calmly and directly, he acknowledged that they had come to a stage where they wondered if they could go on together. It wasn't a gossip-based rumor. They put a lot of effort into overcoming that fact. After that, he talked about the section that stunned a lot of people. I didn't correct the rumor, so it continued. I thought our mending should be private rather than public, not because I was trying to hide controversy. It was evident from that comment that he had chosen to remain silent, not fear or denial, but the conviction that the public didn't have a right to know every aspect of their struggle. But he believed it was time to correct the record after years of miscommunications and conjecture. He made it clear that their realization that their marriage required the same degree of attention, integrity, and spiritual support that he provided to others was the sole thing that marked a turning point in their relationship. He acknowledged that repairing what had been harmed required therapy, deliberate communication, and removing oneself from some obligations. For the first time, Bishop Morton acknowledged in public the extent of their difficulties, not as a shocking admission, but as a reality he was at last prepared to accept. Then he made a statement that completely changed the message's course. It was not the image that reunited us. It was conviction. It was dedication. It was deciding to persevere in the face of our shortcomings. However, the most illuminating aspect was still to come. Bishop Paul Morton confirmed the long-standing rumor about his marriage's early difficulties before moving on to a more somber reality, one that many public figures never acknowledge. Every aspect of his life, including his family and ministry, was impacted by the personal stress in his house. He clarified that despite the years of stress, he continued to lead, preach, and help people through their most trying times. But in private, he carried a burden that was never visible on screen or behind the pulpit. He said that his lectures were genuine, but they came from a guy engaged in struggles that the congregation didn't fully comprehend. He acknowledged that battling divide at home made it challenging to teach about unity. Talking about healing grew more difficult as he dealt with his own personal scars. And when his own personal life seemed out of balance, it was almost impossible to help others find spiritual harmony. He was straightforward and unapologetically direct. My marriage was brittle, but my ministry was powerful. And I had to confront facts I had been ignoring for too long because of that dissonance. He clarified that his wife's emotional estrangement from him had a cascading impact. The strain was felt by their kids. Changes were detected by the extended family. Even devoted churchgoers who had known him for decades sensed a change, even if they were unable to identify it. He claimed to have spent a lot of time attempting to keep the two worlds apart, the private battle and the public ministry. However, he eventually came to the conclusion that it was not feasible. He couldn't hang ministry like a coat at the door. He was inhabited by it. The pain also did. He acknowledged that he had to completely reevaluate how he led his church as his marriage reached a breaking point. He started to realize that leadership based on fatigue, emotional neglect, and quiet suffering would ultimately fall apart. He realized that he had held himself to unattainable and unsustainable expectations, and he came to see that he had inadvertently let the responsibilities of ministry take precedence over those at home who most needed him. He also revealed that his wife's emotional problems at the time were much more severe than most people realized. Real, but not dramatic. It was obvious that she needed help, but at the time he was unsure of how to give it. Real enough that she started to carry worry and anxiety, which ultimately impacted her health and her capacity to perform the duties of a bishop's wife. Even on the days when she felt overburdened and exhausted, she was expected to be visible, powerful, and calm. He admitted that for a long time he had miscalculated the demands made on a pastor's spouse, the demand that they always be emotionally stable, spiritually solid, and publicly supportive, as well as the scrutiny, expectations, and frequent comparisons. He acknowledged that he misjudged the true weight of that responsibility on her. Then he made a statement that demonstrated the intensity of their internal conflict. In the process of serving everyone else, I nearly lost my family. Just that sentence changed the atmosphere in the room. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't overblown. It was only a fact that he had kept to himself for years. He clarified that he knew leadership requires honesty, balance, and boundaries, not perfection, performance, or public approval. The instant he realized his marriage was in jeopardy, he explained how he started to reorganize his schedule, prioritize spending time with his wife and kids, and withdraw from some obligations. He acknowledged that he needed to retrain his communication, listening, and support skills for those closest to him. He did not portray it as a heroic metamorphosis. He portrayed it as an essential adjustment, a moment of responsibility that altered his preaching, counseling, and lifestyle. However, he also made it apparent that the true turning point in his life occurred later, when he and his spouse achieved complete transparency, not with the general world, but with one another. And the choice they made at that time would prove to be the pivotal moment that preserved their marriage and altered their course in life, because it wasn't just about their relationship that they learned about next. It had to do with something more profound, something that affected their identity, their mission, and their religion. Bishop Paul Morton did not portray the time that almost ended his marriage as a dramatic climax. He described it as a gradual awakening, when he and his spouse realized they could no longer live the way they had been. He referred to it as the turning point, since it was sincere rather than abrupt. For the first time, they took a step back and faced the reality without pretense, pride, or fear. When they eventually sat down together and confessed something they had never truly uttered aloud, he disclosed, the transformation started. Both of them were in pain. They had developed a tacit distance that was getting difficult to ignore, as a result of the demands of ministry, the demands made on their marriage, and the emotional burdens they each bore. He clarified that disagreements or treachery had nothing to do with the breaking point. It was the result of years of quiet, daily accumulation of emotional stress. Many marriages fail publicly, he claimed, but theirs nearly failed silently due to weariness, quietness, and the conviction that they had to continue for the first time for the benefit of the church. They talked candidly about the difficulties his wife was facing. He recognized that she had struggled with her own emotional needs, personal issues, and times of intense internal stress for years while attempting to fulfill the responsibilities of a bishop's wife. He acknowledged that it took him too long to understand her suffering, not because he didn't care, but rather because he had persuaded himself that ministry had to come first at all times. Then, he made a statement that many leaders seldom recognize in public. I understood that if we kept acting as though nothing was wrong, there would never be any healing. He explained how he and his spouse made the decision to seek support from qualified counselors who could help them navigate the layers of miscommunication and unsolved issues that had accumulated over the years, rather than from churchgoers. According to him, this was a tough choice at the time, since many leaders are afraid of being judged or criticized when they acknowledge they need outside help, but they had to get to a place where survival was more important than appearance. Counseling, he explained, made them face patterns they had been ignoring for years. It demonstrated how their personal lives had been eclipsed by ministry. It revealed the growing emotional gap between them, and it made it clear to them that they needed to start over in order to rebuild connection, trust, and communication. He also discussed the useful adjustments they made. He started making changes to his routine, cutting back on pointless travel, and establishing time limits. He set aside particular days for his family. He made a commitment to listen intently during talks rather than half listening while mentally preparing sermons. He discovered the importance of taking his time and putting relationships ahead of public approbation. His spouse made progress toward recovery as well. She started to regain confidence in her role as an individual with her own identity and purpose, rather than as a public figure bound by her husband's title. She also sought support for her emotional well-being and improved her ability to express her demands. Morton clarified that she began talking more freely about what she needed to feel understood and supported, and that she stopped carrying silent expectations. This was not a quick procedure, he said. It required months of deliberate effort, patience, and vulnerability. Setbacks occurred. Uncomfortable conversations had place. There were times when old behaviors came back. However, they persisted because they at last grasped a crucial concept. Their home's foundation, not its appearance, was what they were battling for. He made it clear that there was more than one significant incident that marked the beginning of their marriage. It was the choice to be honest with themselves, with one another, and ultimately with those who held them in high regard. Then, to the surprise of many who listened, Bishop Morton disclosed the deeper reality. Our marriage's strongest aspect was established amid the most trying time in our life. He clarified that the rebuilding process changed the way he conducted his ministry. He started preaching after gaining a deeper comprehension of actual suffering. His writings become more sympathetic, more realistic, and more relevant to the problems people encountered on a daily basis. He claimed that experiencing brokenness gave him a renewed sense of purpose, clarity, and humility. But after all the mending they had gone through, he still had to face one more reality, one that people have been silently questioning for years. How the pair they became in the later chapters of his book was eventually influenced by this protracted season of stress